Hi, everyone. I'm Robyn Purchia. I am an attorney, an activist, and I write the Green Space environmental column for the San Francisco Examiner. I've had the column for almost 5 years now and have covered local waste issues in San Francisco almost 50 times. So this is a huge passion of mine. I'm very happy to be here as the moderator tonight. My husband and I also strive toward zero waste, which has certainly reduced the cost of living with two small kids in San Francisco. So I hope everyone who's watching is pretty fired up after watching this story of plastic. A big thank you to the San Francisco Surfrider Foundation and volunteers Holden and Eva for making the screening possible. We have some pretty cool anti-plastic warriors on the panel. So I'm happy to introduce local San Franciscan and new father, Stiv Wilson, who is the creator and executive producer of The Story of Plastic and the co-director of the Peak Plastic Foundation. I was reading Stiv's background, it's quite impressive, so I'm just going to include a little bit of it right now. After completing 35,000 nautical miles sailing the world to study marine plastic pollution, Stiv co-authored the first ever global estimate of the abundance of plastics in all of the major 5 oceans in the peer-reviewed journal PLOS One. After co-authoring and publishing several other scientific papers on the abundance of microplastics in the marine and freshwater systems, Stiv went on to pass state-level policy and the first plastics-focused national policy, which is awesome, the Plastic Free Waters Act that was signed into law by President Obama in 2015. Stiv is a frequent speaker on the issue of plastic pollution. His work has been met with critical acclaim, winning a United Nations Ocean Hero Award. He is co-founder of Break Free from Plastic movement that now comprises over 1,800 NGOs across the globe. He is also an advisor to Senator Udall and Representative Lowenthal to develop the first comprehensive plastics legislation in federal Congress, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and he consults on national level campaign and policy initiatives in Southeast Asia. And of course, The Story of Plastic, which we just all watched, has earned several awards on the film festival circuit. I'm also excited to introduce Miho Ligare, the Plastic Pollution Policy Coordinator for the Surfrider Foundation's Plastic Pollution Initiative. She brings over 15 years of policy, research, and management experience working at nonprofits, government agencies, and academic institutions. Miho has a master's in environmental science and management from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and served as a California Sea Grant State Fellow for the California Natural Resources Agency. I am so excited to hear both of your thoughts tonight after watching that really powerful film. So my first question, and Stiv, I'm sure you've gotten this a whole bunch of times, but I'm really curious to know, as you were shooting that film, what really stood out to you? What surprised you?
Well, a lot of things, were pretty kind of mind altering. I think, the thing you can't really express in the film is sort of the scale as it truly is, like, and how it assails your senses from sort of a smell standpoint, from a heat standpoint. And, that seeing this stuff like in real life is pretty traumatic. I mean, I kind of suffered through some PTSD afterwards, coming back and, telling people it's pretty bad. And they'd be like, well, we're working hard and, we're optimistic. I'm like, yeah, but like, it's bad. But I think, what surprised me the most was the resiliency of people living, in this situation in the developing world and low income countries. They're not miserable, like, we went to a lot of places that I think privileged people would sort of think of as like hell without mincing the word. And, when you go there, there's kids playing, there's, people working, people smiling, waving to you wherever you go. I mean, granted, I'm like a big sweaty white guy, so I look pretty weird in a lot of these places. But super friendly. And then the backdrop is just like a horrific landscape. and there's people like, hey, how you doing? And it was like that sort of juxtaposition was pretty surprising. But there are amazing people on this planet working to solve these problems, and I was surprised at sort of the breadth and scope and capability. Not because it's coming from a low-income country, but just because there's a lot of these solutions that no one's ever seen. And when you see that sort of ingenuity and innovation and quite frankly genius, it's pretty inspiring. So it was a mix of like trauma and also real inspiration to see how many people are connected around the world working on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the film did leave us on an uplifting note, but I feel like that was kind of the old normal. Now we're dealing with COVID and the pandemic, and a narrative that's really getting pushed on us that disposables are safer, they're healthier. Even San Francisco hasn't, lifted its reusable ban. And we're considered one of the zero waste movement, leaders. I'm just curious, and this is for both you, Stiv, and Miho. What are your thoughts about our current situation? And do you have an optimistic look at the future?
Sure, yeah, I can start, and yeah, please fill in and add to it. I think that, initially having, the pandemic and really focusing on the human dimension of it and how tragic it has been. And so I think that, it was totally fair and, okay for, people to think that reusables weren't an option. But I think at this point, and also the plastics industry really pushing heavily saying that, reusables was not a safe option. And I think that, them taking advantage of it, and then also, there's not enough research out there that shows anything conclusive. And so, we recognize that reusables are perfectly safe. The CDC, Cal OSHA, they've come out with recommendations talking about how to safely use reusables. And so I think at this point, now that it's been several months, and also the statewide for California, the bag ban has been lifted as of this week. I think it is time to really change the conversation, and I think it's completely appropriate to start pushing reusable products.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, moreover, like, I just fundamentally don't believe that there are petrochemical solutions to petrochemical problems. So, bottom line, the disproportionate effect of the EPA rollbacks on frontline and fence line communities around, where plastic feedstocks are being made and PPE is being manufactured, like, Cancer Alley in Louisiana, the Houston Ship Channel, the Ohio River Valley, Beaver County, Pennsylvania, increasing pollution around the Hercules incinerator in Minneapolis, Detroit. It's you can't sacrifice, like, frankly, a bunch of non-white people so privileged white people can have the illusion of safety. And that I find is really disturbing and really cynical, because for years the EPA has been rolling back which toxins they monitor. We touched on that in the film. It's like the air is actually getting cleaner because you're not looking for it anymore. And now they're not even monitoring at all. So the burden of pollution on people around, chemical refineries, plants, extraction is just off the charts. And so on one side of their mouth, they're saying, safety, we're sterile and clean. We're killing a bunch of people, and that claim's not, necessarily true either. Anything that has been washed and sanitized is clean. whether it's reusable or it's a disposable plastic bag. So, to Miho's point, certainly, we need to fundamentally redesign commerce around reusability. And I don't think we're ever going to have a bigger opportunity in our lives to do so. So yeah, it's a bummer, just as you said, Robyn, like we were talking about the old normal in Story of Plastic. Well, our tactics and our strategies are also the old normal. So it's time to really, stand and demand the future we want, not just the future we don't. And I'm really impressed. Eva's organization, Upstream, has been really on the forefront of this and reusability, and actually sticking their neck out when other people were afraid to sort of say, no, this stuff's going to be okay. It's cool. So yeah, I think cumulatively, we're going to make some quantum leaps in progress because, we've never had this kind of opportunity. And crises is when the impossible becomes politically possible. And unfortunately, I'm quoting Milton Friedman there, who I disagree with on almost everything except for that quote. So.
Well, I hope that's right. And you touched on this just when you were answering that question, Stiv. And again, Miho and Stiv, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because along with the COVID, we've also been, all the protests around Black Lives Matter, and our country is undergoing this deeper conversation around systemic racism. And there's a lot of systemic racism tied to the production of plastic. And so how do we kind of amplify that point so that, we can counter plastics' argument that, plastics are the safer, healthier choice?
Well, essentially, you just sort of set a treatment for what is the Story of Plastic 2. So, Peak Plastic Foundation, my new NGO, staffed by producers of the Story of Plastic. We're working with a BIPOC leadership council that we've identified from at-risk regions to develop essentially that exact story. Is, for many years, industry has liked to keep this issue framed as a litter problem downstream and a marine conservation problem because whales and dolphins don't vote. And if you can keep the onus on the consumer, they can punt the responsibility question. What conversation they do not want to have is about the systemic racism and institutional racism intrinsic to the production of plastics. Ever since, this is the real stain of our country. And if you all haven't read A People's History of the United States, it's a good place to start because it's told from the position of the oppressed. But if without going too deep into this, if you look at Nixon's Southern strategy, it was to keep the Black man down so that you had a cheap form of labor that was not politically resilient to push back. And that has trickled down throughout the century or the decade since to create these pockets of communities that do not have wealth, do not have political representation. So you can cite whatever polluting industry you want there because they can't push back. And it's not because they're not capable, it's because they're not privileged. And so that is what our next story is going to be, is essentially plastic justice and plastic is racist intrinsically. Because we feel if we can force that conversation with fast moving consumer brands, as well as extraction companies, refining companies, the Dow DuPonts of the world, we can actually change the public opinion around who's responsible for the pollution around plastic. Because a lot of people, believe that, if you don't litter and you put stuff in your recycle bin, that you're not the problem. when actually plastic killed a lot of people by the time it got to you. Well, it's already pollution when it's sitting on the shelf of the grocery store. And this is something we're super passionate about. But as a white-led organization, I mean, there's two of us, Megan Potter and myself, who also produced the story of plastic. We recognized like we need a leadership council in the space to co-create this work, with people of color, and we've done that. We are now working on, you know, sort of looking at layers of demographics around the petrochemical build out. We'll be doing that with Center for International Environmental Law, or CL, and then we're going to start doing storytelling. And coming out of COVID, you know, I think the work is really a just recovery, and we just launched a video series yesterday on that as well, and it's been pretty cool. We're experimenting with remote filmmaking, but we're pretty impressed with the results so far. That was a rambling answer, but thanks.
Yeah, that was perfect. That was like exactly what I was kind of going to hit upon about how these environmental justice issues are social and racial justice issues, and so they're intrinsically tied. And thinking about just the whole life cycle of plastic hurts disadvantaged communities, and the story of plastic, you know, highlights this so well. And even speaking to, you know, climate change issues, it's all really closely tied together, and it becomes, yeah, just this social justice, racial justice issue that, you know, the environmental community is, you know, gladly helping and supporting those folks working on that topic.
Miho, are there any policies that are, or are there policies that are on the table now also incorporating EJ, environmental justice issues in them?
Well, I would say, yeah, just speaking from like a broader perspective, because this plastics issue is tied to racial justice issues, it's not, you know, it doesn't specifically call it out, but we are focusing on policies that look at extended producer responsibility. So that's really exciting to put the onus on the producers and manufacturers, so that they are the ones that are, you know, being more accountable, you know, these negative externalities of producing plastic, all the way to, they say it's like a waste management problem, but in reality, it's really not. And so having them, you know, yeah, putting more responsibility on them to think about the packaging, and even at the end, how they deal with the trash. And I think with that, that will address some of these social justice issues, and also, you know, hopefully help disadvantaged communities where, you know, their landfills or the incineration plant, the refineries are just, you know, a few miles away. And there are a few state bills too that are looking at buffer zones, and so creating a space where, you know, facilities can't operate if it's near, you know, a residential community, a school, a place of worship.
It's crazy that that even needs to be said.
Yeah.
So we did get a question. This is from Corinne. You touched on policy, but what are the levers that we can pull to cause change?
I mean, I think there's a lot of them. I think and hi, Corinne. Nice to see you through the panel attendee link here. You know, I think to Miho's point, we're part of a state policy group with Break Free from Plastic that Surfrider is sort of organizing and chairing on a multi-state strategy. There is, my organization is going to be working on bringing in sort of EJ voices, environmental justice voices in there. And I think those are the real levers that need to be pulled. Is demographically, this issue has been sort of, you know, stuck in sort of coastal elite land. And I say that because if you live on a coast in the United States, the property values are higher. You are a more privileged person for the most part. Not necessarily true in all of the Gulf Coast, but certainly the prime real estate. So, and when we like go to committees, we're always like, we need some, environmental justice voices in here. And the mistake we keep making as a movement is we only call on EJ voices when we need something from them. And so what we actually need to do is bring them invite them to the table to develop the policy with us. And so it actually speaks to their needs. So, I was really heartened. And we did a screening of Story of Plastic with Algalita Marine Research and Education in Long Beach. And a guy who works there, his name's Michael Doshi, people call him Doshi. He tagged along when I was making the Story of Plastic, and it utterly changed his life. And that screening had all the folks who are living around the refineries in Long Beach, plus all the ocean like surfer nerds as well, in the same theater, and a discussion happened, and there was this intersectionality. So that lever, I think, is the number one lever we need to pull, is building policy that is representative of different parts of the supply chain and different impacts, because you have built a tremendous amount of power then. If white people and brown people and black people are screaming the same chorus, and white people are actually, really practicing good allyship, that creates the kind of power that industry, can't beat. Because right now, to be frank, like, industry is not afraid of white women in Marin. They just aren't, and I kind of say it how it is, but it's true. Like, and if we think we're going to win these issues with just very privileged people who are sad about turtles, we're crazy. So I think it's sort of like redesigning, what that table looks like, where you're building the policy. That's, I think, the first big step we need to make as a movement, and we're starting to. Absolutely.
And I would add, I think another piece is, bringing businesses that are trying to do the right thing. And I think in the Bay Area, there are a lot of great, smaller companies trying to implement the reusable system and make it more feasible. And there's various pilot projects. And so bringing them also to the table and highlighting their work and being able to show that it's feasible and it's actually, a good business practice, and it helps them save money, and it's good for the environment. I think that's important too.
If industry is not afraid of white women in Marin, who are they most afraid of? Are you saying a unified coalition, policymakers?
Yeah, I would say they're afraid of kids. They're afraid of frontline impact communities, because they don't have talking points for this. And, they're privileged themselves. I mean, these industries are led by white men, like that we're talking about. And they don't even know how to speak to communities of color. So if you have strong talking points and strong data, it's pretty hard for them to counter. And, I think that's a voice that they're actually afraid of. And especially intersectional coalitions, they're really afraid of, because if the EJ person is talking to the woman in Marin and they're friends and they trust each other, then that means they are seeing and understand the whole system and who's affected. And that creates the narrative shift, and it creates the talking points that really scares them, and in my experience, it's been those sort of multilateral coalitions. I mean, it's what made Break Free from Plastic a thing, frankly, is, my friend Emma Priestland in the UK is constantly in meetings with Unilever, and Unilever is talking about how great they do in Europe. And because she's seen the stuff that you see in the Story of Plastic, and is friends with people on the ground in Indonesia and the Philippines and China and India, she can literally WhatsApp them in real time and be like, is this policy bullshit? And they're like, yeah, here's photos. And then she'll just go like this, in open forum and say, and they're like, how do you know all that? And so the fact that the right hand is talking to the left is that's a new deal. That's a new power. And I think the brand audits too. That's shifting the narrative around responsibility and scaring them optically, scaring companies optically, having all their crap in the environment. They hate that, so.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about the brand edits. I think it's really powerful because, up until now, it's like, oh, it's all trash and there's no really anyone to point your finger at. But now you can see these water bottles or Nestle or these food packaging wrappers that have the logos on it. And so it holds the companies accountable. So I think, yeah, that's a really exciting piece. Yeah, and I liked everything you said, Stiv. Thanks.
I'm curious, this is where I was going to go before. In the Bay Area, we see this economy growing for reusable goods. I'm wondering if that's kind of what we saw with energy, solar gradually growing to kind of take on the big fossil fuel industries. Have you guys seen, speaking nationally or maybe just outside the Bay Area, growth of kind of reusable economies?
I would say that in the Surfrider Foundation, we have our Ocean Friendly Restaurant program, and I think San Francisco is a great supporter of this. And it shows, even within California nationwide, it's a growing program. And so I think there is interest and support for restaurants that are using reusables. And even in this, pandemic era, we're still seeing, people go to these restaurants, we're promoting them. And so I think there's definitely a space and interest in reusables.
Yeah, I think, one of the barriers is publicly traded companies. The CEO of that company can only make decisions based on increasing capital for their shareholders. So if you're a CEO and you want to make a sustainable choice, you literally can't do that by law. You have a fiduciary obligation to increase the capital for your shareholders. If the optics problem of your brand polluting the environment becomes a fiduciary problem, then you can start making switches. So we're starting to see it, in big companies like, Loop is a reusable service that's starting to scale. It's pretty clunky how it's doing it right now, but it's this new market. Like when they show the metal container of the Haagen-Dazs ice cream, that went viral. So that's actually like peer-to-peer marketing that is priceless. So a lot of people took notice of that in the business world, that you can actually look at marketing in a different way. So I think, the demand for this will grow over time. And I think, and so will the venture capital moving into it. And that's where we really need to do some work is, I think there's people on this call right now who have reusable businesses or sustainable businesses. And if they got, a $2 million infusion of capital, they could scale at a pretty quick rate because they have the model, they have the customer base, they just don't have the seed capital to scale it at speed. So I think increasingly, if we do our job as advocates and demonstrate that, single use is a losing business in the long haul, you'll start seeing shifts. And you've already seen it in oil and gas. Like that's one of the biggest good news moments of COVID-19 is people in the oil and gas industry are going out of business because they don't have access to capital anymore because so many people are divesting and it's economically a losing business. So as we start looking at downstream businesses, we're freeing up capital to scale other industries, whether it's renewable energy or reuse programs.
Yeah, it seems that we need to, pull the right policy levers to get the reusable economy to grow properly. Um, and I'm curious, I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. This is kind of my last one. But where should we go from here with advocates? As advocates, are there bills that we should get behind? What do you guys think?
Yeah, speaking for California, so there's SB 54 AB 1080 that's currently in the legislature, and that's the extended producer responsibility bill. And so the idea is by 2030, 75% of single-use packaging must be recyclable. And so this is a really big, exciting EPR bill that we've been working on. And so this is going to be both sides of the legislature. They're going to vote for it late summer, but Surfrider, we have an action alert. And so contacting your local legislature saying that this is still a really important issue right now, and it's the case everywhere, but there's not a whole lot of appetite for environmental policy, but this is still really important, and you can still make the connection to the pandemic. And so that's something that we're really pushing for. And there's also a parallel ballot initiative, and so that should come out in 2022. We're hoping that we were collecting signatures before the pandemic, but with everything happening, we had to pull signature gatherers off the street. But we pivoted to a mail-in. We were collecting mail-in signatures, and so we're hoping we'll know whether we meet the 2022 deadline or the number of signatures within the next couple weeks. And so that's something to look out for. And Stiv, I think I'll let you talk about the federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, but that one's really exciting too.
Yeah, I think the federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, it's one of the most comprehensive policies that we've seen as advocates because it does speak to upstream and downstream concerns. I do think it needs to be iterated on to, get at toxics a little bit more. However, you do have environmental justice frontline communities advocating for that, and you have downstream sort of product stewardship organizations advocating for it too. So it's one of the first real comprehensive intersectional policies we have, and there's a lot of discussions about taking that state to state to state. I also think there's a massive opportunity in divestment, but not framed through the climate lens. Good work has been done on climate change, but the thing that's interesting about plastic pollution, and it's why I've worked on it for as long as I have, is the general public fundamentally gets it. They fundamentally understand it. No matter what race, creed, or color, if you see garbage on a beach, garbage in the street, it shouldn't be there, and it's anthropogenic. That is, it's human-made. And so by looking at big plastic as industry that we start to defund because of the pollution aspect of it, both from an environmental justice standpoint and a biodiversity standpoint, let's get pension funds out of it. Let's get procurement and all like educational institutions, let's get them out of single-use plastics. Let's just keep drying up the market for them, for the downstream selling, and beat up the upstream sort of fracking industry and demonstrate the poor economics of fracking. And if you can, already we've seen Goldman Sachs, we've seen major venture capital firms say we're done with oil and gas. You had that guy, I think he's on CNN, Jim Cramer, the hardball guy, saying I'm done with oil and gas. That is you have turtles jumping up in the ocean when they're hearing that stuff, so it's getting at the economics and the poor economics, like we don't even need to talk about the environment. We can just talk about you're going to lose money on this deal. And if they can't build infrastructure, they can't make plastic, so they can't make plastic pollution. So there's a huge opportunity there too, right now, especially in COVID. And the one thing, like sort of taking it out on a high note, we've got a lot of pollution, a lot of waste from PPE and single-use stuff coming, but less plastic is being made today than was at the end of April. A lot of these, like one of the biggest fracking companies, Marathon, filed for Chapter 11 yesterday. BP is selling all of their shale gas. They're punting it to Ineos, but they're getting out of fracking because they're losing money. Dow shuttered 5 plants. So this industry is really on the ropes economically, and it's time for us as advocates to hammer the nail in that coffin and finally move from an extractive economy to a sustainable one, to a boom and bust to a steady growth, and get away from disposable and get to renewable and reusable.
Wow, I did not know that all those, I did not know about that news that all those companies were pulling out. So that's wonderful to hear. And it's a high note, but I can't let you guys off that quickly because we got another question, which is good news, from Janice. She says, I am advocating for local ordinances in northern San Diego County. We are making progress, but COVID-19 has impacted city governments and businesses. City councils are reluctant to move forward with ordinances. What advice do you have for someone like me who's pushing for policy in small jurisdictions?
I can go, I guess, or if you want to start, and then.
I'm going to say EPR. I'm like, this is the time to make producers responsible for the very reason that municipalities are cash strapped. And so I think the municipalities themselves can start advocating for this stuff because they don't have the money to pay for these programs because tax base is drying up and unemployment. So if industry wants to do business, they're going to have to figure out how to pay for these things. And I think you have now a necessity argument for EPR versus just a responsibility piece. I don't know. What do you think, Miho?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And without knowing exactly what kind of policies you're working on, I think that, we in San Francisco is a great model for this. We've seen those comprehensive foodware ordinances happening, and with the restaurants taking such a huge hit, we've seen it stall out a little bit or a lot. And so kind of figuring out what city council members are willing to take on. And so rather than maybe addressing all restaurants, you're looking at new businesses for, say, just like having to opt in for utensils or condiments. So things like that, we can still push forward and move the dial a little bit, although it might not be as progressive and strong as we'd like it to, but we want to be here and make sure that we're still at the table having these really important conversations so that, we're able to support our community the best way we can, and also make these environmental impacts that are positive. And so I totally understand that some of these policies you might be getting more pushback, and I would say making sure that you bring in the public health angle. A lot of these ordinances or bag ban suspensions we've seen doesn't really have a strong connection to public health, or they have no science, or that it's misguided. And so being able to point to rigorous scientific research saying that you can safely wash reusables and it's completely safe once you do that, I think is important. And I think we've seen in some of these local ordinances, they're passing their own bag ban suspensions. And even with the statewide bag ban expiring, there's some places that are still doing that, or reluctant to have people use reusable bags. But I think that, you know, if we're able to bring them in, leave all your groceries in the cart, take it out and bag them, you know, at your car once you leave the store. And so the people working there have no contact with the bags. That's one way to go around it. And so, yeah, that was kind of a roundabout way of answering your question.
Janice specified that it's SUP policies, but I think you pretty much touched on that. So single-use plastics that, you know, there's no research necessarily saying that plastics is safer or cleaner than reusables. In fact, I've seen the opposite, that the disease can stay on the plastics for longer. So it seems like you guys have touched on that. And I have to say, San Francisco is one of those jurisdictions that still hasn't allowed reusable bags used. And I just wrote an article about this. It just seems like our city leaders are being gaslighted by big plastic. So it's so important to get the narrative out there, the right narrative that reusables are okay, and to push hard because asking people to bag at their cars is just putting an extra burden on people that a lot of people won't do that. That's how I see it. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think with the statewide bag ban in place again, so stores are allowed to charge the 10-cent fee. And so if you're able to, but they're still charging them, but giving those out. And so it would save them money too if they allow people to use reusables.
Yeah, and I think it's just, you know, it's time for sort of a bold belief that we can actually shift culture. I mean, I think a lot of us in the policy space have been, you know, looking at what's politically possible. And, you know, given like what the makeup of the legislature is and what passed in a season before, like we're in a brave new world, you know, and I think, you know, it's a massive opportunity. It really is. We can look at it as we're sad that we're stuck in our houses and economy's tanking and there's unemployment, and that's all true, and people are suffering for sure. But there's not suffering just because of the pandemic. They're suffering because of the pillars of capitalism that are contributing to that suffering. I mean, this is designed in a lot of ways. The rich are getting much richer in this time, and the poor are getting much poorer. And, you know, look, I don't want to like turn it into like I'm an anti-capitalist like warrior. Like that's not my point. My point is, moreover, that fundamentally people are recognizing what is essential and what we expect from government, and that is a massive opportunity because people are awake to, you know, these tools we have as citizens of the United States in a way they weren't before. You know, people were just sort of like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of like do my tech job and drink cosmopolitans and eat sushi and like ignore people on Tinder, you know, like, I mean, like that sort of like come down a lot. And people are like, whoa, we're hurt. We actually, oh, we have this democracy. Oh, we have this constitution. Oh my gosh, if you get out into the street and actually protest these things change. I mean, like what Black Lives Matter has been able to do in the past 2 months should inspire the crap out of all of us. Like it's unprecedented. You know, we finally brought centuries old issues to bear with the death of a man that was the straw that broke the camel's back in my hometown, like 4 blocks from where I grew up, looking at George Floyd. And finally, that ignited a fire that said, no more, never again, and we're not stopping till we win in victory. And we've never seen that in this country to that degree. And that should be like an empowering and inspiring thing for us all, and to believe that we can take all of these policies over the finish line. Because if we don't, we're stuck with water we can't drink, air we can't breathe, and racial inequities that are solidified and entrenched forever. And so it's not only an opportunity, it's a time of great duty as a citizen. And I would say, use that time and use it wisely, because, I just had 2 kids and they were born post-COVID. They're not going to understand the world as it was before. They're only going to understand the world moving forward. And it's going to be fundamentally different. And I believe it's going to be fundamentally more equitable. It's going to be fundamentally more just, and fundamentally more sustainable. Because if it's not, there's no future for humanity on planet Earth. Whew.
Miho, did you have something to
Fired
add?
up.
No, that was
know you
great. I
were.
know. I was like, wow, that was awesome. Yeah. I think for me, it's been, a time for reflection and learning. And it's really, as tragic as everything is, it is an opportunity for the environmental community to really reflect and really strategically think about how we can engage in racial justice issues. And that's been really eye-opening and inspiring. And, a lot of, myself included, and the people that I've spoken with, we're not entirely sure what that might look like or what the right thing to do is, but we're talking and we want to do this and we want to be very much engaged. And so I think it's really exciting to see, and I hope that we can continue this dialogue and it becomes something that is really intrinsically connected and not an afterthought. And like Stiv said earlier, they're at the table from the very beginning, developing these, not only policies, but we're really taking in their feedback and learning about what they need, and they're telling us, and not, having this like top-down approach and then bringing them in later.
I'm very, very, very fired up right now. Thank you, Miho and Stiv, for this awesome. And I just want to add, I don't know if Miho and Stiv, do you have anything else you want to add? Stiv, you really left us on a high note.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stiv. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And apologies that I'm kind of a shadow. My toddler was screaming in the back before bed, so kind of snuck out.
Yeah, I just want to say, thanks to Holden, Robyn, Eva, and all in Surfrider San Francisco. Of all the chapters, this one has been at the forefront of this work for a long time. And a lot of it has to do with Eva's leadership. And I think she's an inspiring character in this movement to all of us. And I just want to say thanks. Thanks for checking out the movie. Thanks for the informed discussion. And thank you for all your work. And, I'm honored to be on a panel with Miho. And onward.
Onward and upward. I'm jumping in for a second just to say, Stiv, you challenge us by asking us to do so much, and I thank you for that. I think we're all ready to take on a new level of work in this space, and thanks you guys for really addressing that this evening. And Robyn, thank you for your beautiful guidance and for taking on this event.
Of course. Big thank you to everyone. Thank you to San Francisco Surfrider and Eva and Holden, and a big thanks to Stiv and Miho.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to see everyone.
Bye guys, thank you.
Bye. Bye.